Go where the poor girl's shadow still breathes. Let her name walk out of this kingdom without footprints. When the bush grows too loud, the farmer burns it in silence. Bring me no blood, but bring me peace. Bury a coffin so the earth can keep a lie. For a secret survives longer when it sleeps in the ground. If the prince asks, tell them the gods collected what did not belong to him. After all, a crown does not bow to love.
In a kingdom where tradition ruled the heart, a prince loved the girl he was never meant to see. They silenced her name, they buried an empty coffin, and they taught him how to mourn and lie. For 6 years,
why did you leave me?
Crown, until one child stood at a grave and told a story that the earth could no longer keep. This is not just a love story, it is a war between power and truth, between a throne and the woman it tried to erase. The elders of Umochi said the dead slept, but this grave did not sleep. It listened. No one noticed the boy at first. He was too small for the weight he carried, too quiet for a place that swallowed sound. He moved carefully through the cemetery at the edge of Umochi Kingdom, where ancient Iroko trees laid inward like old men whispering secrets meant only for the dead. Their roots clawed through the earth, twisting around forgotten bones and buried lies. The evening wind moved gently, slow and deliberate, like a mourner afraid of disturbing grief, yet the air felt heavy, unnatural, as though the land itself was holding its breath. The boy knelt before a grave that held nobody. The mound was fresh, though the name carved into the stone had been there for 6 long seasons of rain. Time had passed, but the lie had not softened. With small, trembling fingers, the boy traced the letters carved into the stone. He moved slowly, reverently, as though touching an open wound that had never been allowed to heal. "Mama," he whispered, his voice barely louder than breath, but steady with purpose. "I came again." He paused and glanced around, making sure no one was watching. Adults did not like children speaking to the dead. They said it invited questions that could not be answered. "My teacher says spirits hear better at dusk," he continued quietly, "so I came before night." The wind stirred, but the grave remained silent. "Mama," the boy whispered again, his voice cracking just slightly. "They said you died here, but you are still breathing where the sun rises." He lowered his head, listening. "When I ask why they lied, you cry," he said softly. "When I ask who made them lie, you tell me to forgive them." The earth did not answer, but behind him, footsteps stopped. A tall figure stood frozen at the edge of the graves, where shadows gathered thickest and light struggled to follow. Once, his arrival had been announced by drums. Once, warriors had cleared paths for him. Once, his name alone had bent spines and opened the gates. Now, Prince Obinna stood unnoticed among the dead. Grief had stripped him of youth, of anger, of hope. 6 years had carved hollows beneath his eyes, drawn silver through his hair, and driven a wound so deep into his soul that no healer dared name it. He came here often, quietly, faithfully, because this was the only place where his heart still remembered how to bathe. The cemetery was his last place of worship. It held the remains of his shattered spirit. It was the only ground capable of soothing the endless longing that lived inside of him. Because this was where they said she was buried, the woman he loved. They had never allowed him to see her face before they buried her. They said the sickness came swiftly. They said the body was unclean. They said the burial could not wait. They said too many things, and he had believed them, because princes were raised to trust their blood, even when that blood betrayed them. Obinna stepped closer when he heard the boy speak again. He didn't know the boy saw him walking up to him. He never expected the shiver that ran through him when the boy's piercing eyes caught his and his mouth murmured, "Mama says he loved her more than the moon loves the night, but they were afraid of her shadow touching your crown." Obinna froze. His heart stopped beating. The ground beneath his feet seemed to soften as though it recognized his pain. "No," he whispered hoarsely. "That is not true." But the earth did not correct the boy. Slowly the child turned. Their eyes met again and the world tilted. The boy's gaze was steady, ancient, too knowing for someone so young. His face carried echoes Obinna had spent 6 years trying to forget. The familiar curve of a smile, the depth of a gaze, the quiet defiance of love born in poverty. There was something unmistakably regal in the way the boy stood. "You cry like her," the boy said simply. Obinna staggered as though struck. What did you say?" "You cry the same way Mama cries when she thinks I'm asleep," the boy replied with calm certainty. The prince's breath shattered. Who is your mother?" he asked, his voice barely holding together. The boy rose, brushed soil from his small palms and lifted his arm. He pointed towards the distant road, the one that led beyond Omuchi, beyond the palace, beyond lies and graves, the road that led to the truth. Before Omuchi learned how to bury a name, before lies were dressed as mercy and fear wore the mask of wisdom, there was a girl who belonged to the river. Her name was Adanne. She was born during a season the elders still spoke about in lowered voices. The year the rains refused to stop and the harmattan came late, uncertain, as though the sky itself could not decide whether to bless the land or test it. Old women said such children arrived carrying 2 destinies, one written in joy, the other in sorrow. Only time would choose which one would rise. Adanne grew quietly like the strongest things often do. Her parents lived at the far edge of Omuchi, where the red earth thinned into bush and survival demanded patience more than strength. Her father, Okurie, wove baskets from reeds that caught his palms often year after year. Her mother, Wakeko, sold dry fish by the roadside and prayed in whispers that sounded like pleading. Poverty lived with them like an uninvited relative, but Adanne never wore it like shame. Each morning, long before the village stirred, she walked to the river Miri Udo with a clay pot balanced on her head. Her steps were steady, her back straight, her eyes thoughtful. Other girls complained of sore feet and heavy loads, but Adanne moved as though the river had taught her how to carry weight without bending. People noticed, not because she was beautiful, though she was, but because her presence lingered. She listened when others spoke. She knelt when elders passed. She broke up fights without raising her voice and tended the sick with a gentleness that made pain feel seen. Some called her foolish for it. Others said kindness would break her. The river never did. Mirudo accepted her every morning, its waters cool against her ankles, its surface reflecting her face like a quiet promise. She spoke to it sometimes, softly, when no one else was around, and the river listened, the way ancient things always do. It was there on a morning, heavy with mist and silence, that fate found her. Prince Obinna had not meant to go to the river that day. The palace had grown unbearable, its wall thick with expectation, its air heavy with duty. He was the first son of King Ezanyi, raised to rule, trained to command, shaped carefully into a future he had never chosen. Every step he took echoed with the weight of ancestors who ruled without apology. That morning he escaped. He dressed not as a prince but as a hunter and rode beyond the guards, letting the path lead him where it wished. He did not know what he was searching for, only that staying within palace walls felt like slow suffocation. He heard laughter before he saw her. It was soft and unguarded, the kind that came from ease rather than performance. It reached him over the sound of moving water and made him stop without knowing why. When he turned, he saw her. Adani stood at the riverbank, her wrapper tied securely at her waist, her feet sunk slightly into the mud. She was teaching two young girls how to wash clothes without wasting soap, correcting them gently, laughing when one slipped and splashed water everywhere. Obina forgot how to breathe. There was nothing dramatic about her appearance, no jewels, no silk, just sunlight catching her skin, water gliding over her hands, and a calmness that unsettled him more than beauty ever had. When she finally noticed him, her laughter faded. She recognized palace blood instantly. Adani bowed, lowering her eyes. "My lord," she said respectfully, "forgive us. We did not know the land was claimed today." Her voice was steady, unafraid, but cautious. She had learned early what proximity to power could cause. Obina stared at her, was lodged uselessly in his truth. "The land belongs to the river," he said at last, his voice lower than usual, "and the river does not bow to me." She looked up then, surprised, and their eyes met fully for the first time. Something passed between them, quiet, immediate, irreversible. Adani felt it and stepped back instinctively. "We will leave," she said quickly, gathering the girls. "No," Obina said too fast. She paused. He steadied himself, aware of how his pulse he suddenly felt. You may stay," he added. "I was leaving, actually." She studied him briefly, then nodded. "Thank you, my lord." She did not ask his name. She did not ask why a prince stood alone by a river meant for villagers. She returned to her washing. Obina mounted his horse and rode away soon after, his chest tight, his thoughts unsteady, but the river did not release him. That evening, as the palace lamps were lit and drums echoed through stone corridors, Obina realized something had changed. A restlessness settled in his bones, quiet but persistent. Far away, Adani lay on her mat, staring into the dark, her heart strangely awake. Neither of them slept, and somewhere between the palace walls and the river edge, faith began its slow, merciless work. Was not a word Prince Obina had been taught to respect. In the palace, desire was disciplined, trimmed into duty, reshaped until it no longer resembled hunger. Princes were trained to inherit, not to yearn. Love was discussed like strategy. Marriage was spoken of as alliance. The heart, if it existed at all, was expected to obey. Yet, after the river, obedience abandoned him. He tried to bury the memory of her in routine. He sat through councils where elders argued over land boundaries and tribute disputes. He listened as emissaries praised his composure, his promise, his readiness to rule. He nodded at compliments that slid off him like rain on stone. All the while, something inside him kept drifting back to the water and sunlight and a girl who did not know his name. At night, when the palace fell into its careful silence, Obina stood at his window and watched the moon climb slowly into the sky. He imagined it reflected in the river's skin. He imagined her there again, barefoot, unguarded, real. It unsettled him how much he wanted to return. He did not go back the next day or the day after. Each morning, he told himself it was foolishness, dangerous, that proximity to a poor girl with no shield but kindness was not a path meant for him. The elders already whispered about suitable brides from neighboring kingdoms. Alliances were forming without his consent, and yet on the fourth morning, Obinna found himself dressed once more in plain clothes, his crown left untouched, his guards dismissed with irritation, sharp enough to silence questions. The river welcomed him like it had been waiting, and Danny was alone this time. She knelt at the water's edge, scrubbing a single wrapper with deliberate care. Her movements were slower than before, thoughtful, as if her mind wandered far beyond her hands. When she sensed him behind her, she did not turn immediately. "You came back," she said quietly. He stopped. "Yes." She rose, dusted her knees, and faced him. Her eyes were cautious now, not fearful, but aware, as though the river had whispered something to her after he left. "My lord," she said, bowing. "Do not," he replied. "Not here." She hesitated, then straightened. "Then what should I call you?" Obinna opened his mouth, then closed it again. Names were power. Names created expectations. Names summoned consequences. "Obinna," he said finally. "Just Obinna." Her lips parted slightly, as if surprised by the gift. "Adane," she offered in return before she could stop herself. He repeated it softly, testing its shape. It felt dangerous in his mouth. It felt right. They stood there, the river breathing between them, until silence grew heavy with everything they refused to say. "You should not come here often," Adana said at last. "People talk." "Let them," he replied. She shook her head. "They will not speak of you," she said gently. "They will speak of me." Her honesty struck him harder than accusations ever could. "I will not harm you," he said fiercely. She met his gaze then, and something dark flickered in her eyes. Not doubt, but understanding. "Harm is not always a thing someone chooses," she said. "Sometimes it is what follows behind them." He had no answer for that. Instead, he began to come anyway. Sometimes he watched her walk. Sometimes they spoke of small things at first. The river's mood, the stubbornness of goats, the way elders pretended to know everything while fearing the future. She laughed easily when she forgot to be careful, and each laugh cut him open anew. He told her nothing of the throne. She told him nothing of her dreams, but the space between them thinned with each meeting, thickening like a string pulled too far. The first time he touched her, it was accidental. Their hands brushed as she passed him a calabash. The contact was brief, barely a moment, but it burned. Adane inhaled sharply, her fingers curling instinctively as though resisting something alive. She pulled away at once. "I should go," she said, breath unsteady. Obinna watched her retreat, the echo of her warmth lingering in his palm. That night, Adane did not sleep. She lay awake listening to her mother's breathing, to the distant drumbeats from the palace, to her own heart pounding like it was trying to escape her ribs. She prayed, quietly, desperately, not for strength, but for clarity. But none came. The following week, rumors began to ripple through Omochi like a sickness. A prince seen beyond palace walls, a girl who lingered too long at the river, a kindness mistaken for invitation, a fate forming where it shouldn't. Adane heard the whispers before they reached her name. She felt eyes linger longer. She felt caution sharpen into suspicion. And still, when Obinna came, she did not turn him away. The day everything crossed its final line, the sky sky darkened early. Clouds gathered thick and low, pressing down on the world. The river ran restless, its surface breaking into uneasy patterns. Adane stood beside Obina, her hands clasped tightly before her. "You must stop coming," she said, her voice barely steady. This is no longer safe." "For whom?" he asked. "For us, of course," she answered. He stepped closer. "There is no us," she continued, pain treading her words. "Not in the way you want." He reached for her then, not her hand but her face. He cupped her cheek gently, reverently, as though touching something sacred. "I want nothing I cannot protect," he said. Her resolve shattered. She leaned into his touch before she realized she was moving. Tears gathered, uninvited, unstoppable. "Obina," she whispered, breaking. "If you love me." "I do," he said. The word fell heavy between them. The river sobbed. Adane closed her eyes, and in that moment, the land chose sorrow over mercy, because love had been spoken aloud, and Omochi had never forgiven such defiance. Love does not announce itself loudly in places ruled by fear. It lowers its voice. It learns to hide. After the river heard Obina speak his heart, the war did not end, not immediately. Dawn still came. Birds still sang. The palace gong still rang at the same hour each morning. But something unseen shifted. Adane felt it first. The market women no longer greeted her with easy warmth. Their smiles tightened, eyes following her movement with new calculation. Children who once ran to her now hesitated, as if warned away by whispers they did not fully understand. At the river, the air no longer felt private. She washed clothes quickly now, head lowered, senses stretched thin. Even the water seemed restless, carrying rumors downstream. And in the palace, eyes had begun to open. Queen Nkiru noticed the change in her son before anyone dared name it. She was a woman sharpened by power and survival, her beauty preserved by discipline rather than softness. She had learned early that affection was a currency best spent carefully. Love to her was not weakness, but it was dangerous. Obina no longer argued during council. He no longer drank deeply at feast. He no longer lingered near the women chosen to entertain him. His laughter, once easy, had vanished, and worst of all, he disappeared. Not for long, not often enough to raise immediate alarm, but enough. A prince who slipped away unnoticed was a prince unraveling his own protection. She summoned him one evening as rain began to fall. He entered her chambers without ceremony, bowed and waited. "You've grown distant," his mother said calmly, watching him from behind a curtain of incense smoke. "I've been thinking," Obina replied. "That is what worries me," she said. He lifted his gaze then, their eyes met, hers sharp, his steady. "A king who does not think becomes a puppet," he said. Her lips curved, though her eyes did not soften. "And the prince who thinks with his heart becomes a liability." Silence passed in. "You've been seen," the queen continued lightly, "beyond the walls." Obina's jaw tightened. "So have you," he said, "in places no one speaks of." Her smile faded. "Do not test me," she warned. "I am not," he answered. "I am leaving." That word, "leaving," felt like an insult. The queen dismissed him without another word, but when he left, she did not return to her seat. She rang the palace guards, her voice low, precise. "Find me the girl," she said, "the one by the river." The king was told that night. King Ezudo listened without interruption as his wife spoke. His face, carved from years of rule, betrayed nothing, but his hands clenched slowly against the armrest. "A poor girl?" From where? He asked. Nowhere that matters, the queen said, which is precisely the problem. The king exhaled heavily. Our son carries the future of Omochi, he said, not sentiment. And sentiment, the queen replied, has already taken root in his heart. By the next market day, palace messengers moved quietly through the village to Adane's home. They did not threaten openly. They smiled. They praised Adane's parents for raising such a respectful daughter. They spoke of concern, of reputation, of danger when young women forgot their place. Then the smile hardened. Your daughter has caught the attention of the palace, they said quietly. This is not a blessing. Adane's mother wept silently that night. Her father did not sleep. When they told Adane, she listened without interruption. Her hands folded in her lap. She had expected this moment. Love had taught her how to recognize approaching disaster. What do they want? She asked quietly. Her father swallowed. For you to disappear. Her mother clutched her wrapper, sobbing. They said, if you do not leave, her father continued, voice breaking, they will ensure you are removed. Adane nodded slowly. She felt no anger, only a deep, hollow grief. Obinna did not come to the river the next day, nor the next. By the third day, Adane knew the palace had closed its feast. She went anyway. At dusk, when the shadows grew long and courage became a necessity rather than a choice. He was there, waiting. Their relief at seeing each other was brief, fragile. They are watching, she whispered urgently. We must be careful. They have already decided, he replied. I can feel it. She reached for his hand, gripping them tightly. Then listen to me, she said. If they come for me, I will stop them, he said. She shook her head. You cannot fight blood, not without losing everything. He pulled her into his chest then, holding her as though the world itself had grown hostile. I would lose everything for you, my love, he said into her hair. She closed her eyes. That night, Adane dreamt of roads stretching endlessly forward, of a child crying somewhere she could not reach, of a crown sinking into dead earth. And far away, in the palace, Queen Nkiru began to plan a death that would leave nobody behind, because some loves she believed were best buried alive. In a kingdom where tradition ruled the heart, a prince loved the girl he was never meant to see. They silenced her name, they buried an empty coffin, and they taught him how to mourn a lie. For 6 years, grief wore a crown, until one child stood at a grave and told a story that the earth could no longer keep. This is not just a love story, it is a war between power and truth, between a throne and the woman it tried to erase. They did not come with drums, they did not come with fire, they came quietly, the way sickness comes, unannounced, unarguable, already decided. The night they took Adane, the moon hid behind thick clouds, as though the sky itself refused to witness what was about to be done. Omochi slept under a false peace, unaware that a story was being severed at its root. Adane was awake. She has been awake for hours, sitting on the edge of her mat, listening to her mother's breathing and the restless shifting of her father outside the hut. Fear now had a sound. It moved through the dark like an insect crawling inside her chest. When the knock came, it was gentle. Too gentle. Her father opened the door before the second knock could land. The men outside wore no armor, only dark wrappers and faces trained into careful neutrality. Behind them stood a woman Adane had seen only once before. From a distance, her presence unmistakable even without a crown. Queen Nkiru stepped forward. I am sorry, she said softly, as if apologizing for rain. Adane's mother collapsed to her knees. The queen did not look at her. This must be done tonight, Nkiru continued, quietly for the sake of everyone. Her father's voice trembled. She has done nothing wrong, my queen. The queen inclined her head slightly. That is really the point. Adani rose. She felt strangely calm, as though her body had already accepted what her heart was still resisting. She did not cry. She did not beg. She simply stepped forward and bowed. I will go, my queen, she said. Her mother screamed then, raw, broken, animalistic. Adani turned back only once, memorizing her parents' faces, the lines grief had carved too early. She pressed her forehead briefly against her mother's, breathing her in. Forgive me, she whispered. For what? Her mother sobbed. For being loved? They did not allow her to take much. A small bundle, a single wrapper, no farewell to the river, no message for Obinna. The queen watched as Adani was led away, her posture straight, her silence defiant. She is stronger than you think, my queen, one of the men murmured. Queen Nkiru's eyes hardened. That, she replied, is exactly why she cannot stay. Before dawn, a grave was prepared at the edge of the cemetery. It was shallow, symbolic, empty. By sunrise, the story had already been written. They said that Adani had fallen ill suddenly. They said the sickness was swift and shameful. They said her body could not be displayed. They said the burial rites had been rushed for the safety of the land. They said many things. And by the time Prince Obinna heard, the earth had already been sealed over a lie. He broke, not loudly, not dramatically. He went very still. He listened as the words were spoken, each one a blade, slicing cleanly through disbelief, through hope, through memory. She is dead, they told him. She is gone, he heard. She is buried, they whispered. He asked no questions, because the palace had taught him that questions only prolonged pain. He went to the cemetery that night alone. The grave was fresh, the name carved deep, Adani. He knelt and pressed his forehead into the soil until his hands shook. I am sorry, he whispered. I should have been faster. The earth did not answer. Far away on a road that stretched towards an unfamiliar kingdom, Adani walked until her feet bled. She did not know she carried life inside her. She only knew that something precious had been stolen, not her freedom, but her name, and somewhere behind her, love was being buried alive. The road did not ask Adani where she was going. It only demanded that she keep moving. By the time the sun rose fully, her feet were blistered, her throat dry, her body aching with a fatigue deeper than muzzle. The men who escorted her stopped at the border of Omochi, handed her a small pouch of cowries and turned back without a word. No farewell, no mercy. The land beyond felt unfamiliar beneath her feet. Same earth, same sky, yet stripped of belonging. Adani stood alone at the crossroads. The silence so loud it rang in her ears. That was when the sickness began. At first she thought it was grief, the nausea, the dizziness, the sudden waves of weakness that bent her forward until her palms pressed into the dusk. She blamed hunger, she blamed fear, the weight of walking away from everything she had ever known, from the man her soul craved. But days passed, then weeks, and the sickness stayed. She found shelter in a small farming village near the borders of another kingdom, a place forgotten by power and spared of its cruelty. The people there were poor but unguarded, their lives ruled by seasons rather than crowns. They asked no questions when she offered to walk. They didn't ask her name twice. When the village healer placed a hand on her belly, her eyes softened. You carry life, my child, the woman said gently. Adani laughed once, shut, disbelieving, and then she cried. She cried for the river. She cried for Obinna. She cried for her baby, who may never get to meet his father. And when the tears ended, she pressed her palm to her stomach and whispered into the quiet, I will stay. Pregnancy grounded her in ways grief could not unmoor. She walked slowly, carefully. She learned to rest when the sun burned too fiercely. At night, she spoke softly to the growing life inside her, telling stories of a river that remembered names, of a man who loved without knowing how to protect, of a kingdom that mistook fear for wisdom. She never spoke of the palace. The boy was born during the harmattan, when the air was dry and the wind carried dust like secrets. His cry was strong, When she held him, something ancient and fierce rose inside her chest. Not hope, not joy, but resolve. She named him Ikenna, a father's strength. Years passed, grief changed shape. It softened at the edges but deepened at the center, like a river that learned to carve instead of flood. Adani became known for her quiet strength, her kindness, her refusal to bend under bitterness. She did not get married. She did not explain why, despite many asking. Ikenna grew quickly, curious, observant, solemn in ways that startled adults. He asked questions that felt too heavy for his age. He listened more than he spoke. And sometimes at dusk, he would look east and ask, "Mama, where did the sun rise when you were a girl?" She would answer, "Towards home." And then she would turn away so he wouldn't see her face. Back in Omochi, Prince Obinna aged without moving forward. 6 seasons of rain had passed, 6 years of mourning for a woman who had never died, and in that distance, between a grave and a living child, fate waited patiently, sharpening its return. Time did not heal Prince Obinna. It merely taught him how to endure pain without screaming. The palace continued its ritual with cruel precision. Seasons turned. Festivals came and went. New cloth was woven, new titles bestowed, new alliances discussed in voices polished smooth by ambition. Omochi prospered, or so the elders said, but its heir was rotten quietly at the center. Obinna no longer argued with his parents. Resistance required energy, and grief had drained him of all but the minimum needed to breathe. He attended councils, nodded at decisions, spoke only when pressed. His once commanding presence dimmed into something spectral, still respected, still feared, but hollowed out. Servants whispered that the prince walked like a man carrying a grave inside his chest. At night he dreamt of Adani, not always as she was. Sometimes she stood by the river, smiling sadly, unreachable. Sometimes she lay in the earth, eyes open, accusing. Sometimes she called his name from a distance he could never cross. He woke each time with his heart hammering, his hands clenched, the taste of soil in his mouth. He went to the cemetery often. It was the only place where his grief did not have to pretend. He knelt by her grave and spoke to her.
Why did you leave me?
Of things he had done, of things he had failed to do, of how the world had continued without asking his permission. "I should have fought harder," he told the earth once, his voice breaking. "I should have chosen you and let the crown burn." The grave offered no absolution. Queen Nkiru watched her son retreat inward and mistook silence for surrender. By the 60th year, she decided it was time to finish what she had begun. "You must marry," she said one evening, her tone final. "The kingdom requires it." Obinna did not look at her. He just responded, "I am already buried." The king slammed his staff against the floor. "You leave!" King Ezudo thundered, "and as long as you live, you will serve Omochi." They presented him with a bride, beautiful, wealthy, obedient, a daughter of influence, a woman raised to understand power and its bargain. She knelt before him, eyes lowered. "I will be a good queen," she said. Obinna felt nothing. Not anger, not desire, not even resentment, just emptiness. "I will do my duty," he said quietly. That night, he walked again to the cemetery. Rain fell softly, soaking the earth, blurring the edges of the world. He knelt before Adani's grave one last time. "They are taking the future from me," he whispered, "and I'm too tired to stop them, my love." Expecting to hear the echoes of silence, rather what he heard shook his system. Mama said one day you will visit here. Froze. He turned slowly. A boy stood a few feet away, barefoot, his wrapper damp with mud, his eyes too serious for a child no older than 5. He held a small bundle of wildflowers clutched awkwardly in his hand. Obinna's breath caught painfully in his chest. "You should not be here," he said hoarsely. The boy tilted his head. "I come with Mama," he replied. "She says we must greet the dead." Obinna stared at him, at the familiar curve of his brows, the stubborn set of his mouth, the gaze that felt like looking into a mirror cracked by time. "What is your name?" Obinna asked. "Ikenna," he responded. "I am my father's strength." "And who is your father?" the prince asked. "That is none of your business, sir. But if you must know, then you need to meet my mother," Ikenna replied. The little boy's words struck Prince Obinna like thunder. "And where is your mother?" Prince Obinna whispered. The boy smiled faintly and pointed towards the road that led beyond Omoji, beyond griefs, beyond lies, beyond everything Obinna had believed for 6 long years. "My mama," he said, pointing at the grave, "is not dead." The earth beneath Obinna's knees seemed to give way. For the first time in 6 years, something inside him that was not grief stirred. It was terror and it was hope. Obinna followed the boy without thinking. He did not ask permission. He did not call for guards. He did not look back at the palace wall rising dark and imposing behind him. For once, the crowd did not weigh on his head because it was no longer there. He cannot walk with the certainty of a child who had never learned fear. He hummed softly as they passed through the narrow paths leading out of Omoji, his small feet splashing through puddles left by the rain. "Does your mama know you came here alone?" Obinna asked, his voice unsteady. "No, she does not know," the boy replied. "She thought I was going to play with our neighbor's children at the market square." "That means you lied to her," Prince Obinna said. "No, I did not lie to her. She assumed that was where I was going to. I just did not bother to tell her. I don't want her to worry about me," the boy said. "More like if you tell her, she wouldn't let you go," Prince Obinna said. "If that's how you say it, no problem, but definitely not how I say it. Don't worry, I'm not mad. Mama says everyone is entitled to their own opinions," the boy said, looking at the prince like he has forgiven him. They reached a modest compound just beyond the kingdom's edge, a place built of clay and patience. Smoke coiled from a small cooking fire. The scent of roasted yams lingered in the air. Obinna's heart pounded so violently he feared it would betray him before his eyes did. Ikenna ran into the house shouting for his mama. "Mama," he called brightly, "the man from your stories is here." The word narrowed. Adane stepped out. Time collapsed. She was thinner. Perhaps lines of endurance turned her face where laughter once lived. But her eyes, those eyes, held the same quiet fire, the same death that had undone him by the river. For a moment, neither of them moved. Then Adane dropped the bowl in her hands. He shattered at her feet. Obinna's knees gave way. He sank into the mud like a man struck by lightning, his breath tearing painfully from his chest. "You..." His voice failed him. "They said you were dead." She covered her mouth, tears spilling freely now. "They said you believed them," she whispered. Ikenna stood between them, beaming. "Did I tell you Mama cries when she thinks I sleep?" he announced proudly. Obinna sobbed. Not quietly, not with dignity. He sobbed like a man mourning 6 stolen years, like a prince stripped of certainty, like a lover returned from the grave of lies. "I went to your grave every night," he said. "I begged the earth to forgive me." Adane crossed the distance between them and knelt, her hands trembling as she touched his face, solid, warm, real. "I never died," she said softly. "They only buried my name." Silence wrapped around them, sacred and fragile. When they finally stood, Obinna looked at Ikenna again, with terror, with awe, with recognition that cut deeper than any blade. "He is mine," Obinna whispered. Adane nodded. "I did not know when I left," she said. "I would have found you. I swear it. I would have sought for you." Obinna closed his eyes, pressing his forehead to hers. "They took everything from me," he said, "but failed at the most important thing." That night, Obinna did not return to the palace. Adane told him how the priestess of the land that welcomed her for these past 6 years visited her one day and told her she must return, that the time had come for her destiny to be fulfilled, for what is hidden to be revealed. She came back few nights ago, but refused to leave her parents' home during the day. The next morning, Omochi awoke to a truth it had tried to bury. And far above the kingdom, the ancestors stared, because love, long denied, had begun its walk back home. The palace did not sleep the night Prince Obinna failed to return. By dawn, fear had begun to speak aloud. Guards searched the forest. Messengers rode hard through border villages. Elders gathered with voices sharpened by panic, because a kingdom could forgive rebellion, but not disappearance. Queen Nkiru knew. She felt it in the way the air pressed heavy against her chest, in the way memory rose like a ghost she has never managed to kill. Some lies were patient, some waited for the exact moment to bloom. He has found her, she said quietly. The king stared at her. That is impossible, he said. She is dead. The queen did not answer. She hid her wicked plots against the innocent girl from him, and now she dreaded him finding out. By midday, Obinna returned, but not alone. He walked through the palace gates confident and fearless, his shoulders squared, his steps unhurried. At his side walked Adane, her back straight, her expression calm but unyielding. Ikena held his hand, small fingers wrapped tightly around the future he did not yet understand. The courtyard fell silent. Servants froze mid-steps. Elders stopped breathing. The guards did not move, not because they had not been ordered to, but because something ancient in them recognized truth when it walked past. Queen Nkiru stepped forward, her face drained of color. Adane bowed deeply, respectfully, but she did not kneel. "You," the queen said, her voice barely steady. You are supposed to be dead." Adane lifted her gaze. "No," she replied. "I was sent away, not dead." The king staggered back as though struck. "This child," Obinna said, his voice clear, carrying across the courtyard, "is
Father,
my
this
son."
child is my son.
The word son cracked the kingdom open. Chaos erupted, voices rising, questions spilling over one another, outrage clashing with awe, but Obinna raised his hand and the noise faltered. Obinna stepped forward with Adane and the child beside him. His voice did not shout, but it carried heavy with years of grief. "For 6 years," he said slowly, "I have worn mourning like a second skin. You buried the woman I loved before I could even see a corpse. I cried over a grave that held only dust and lies. You watched me break and you called it peace." He turned his gaze to the elders, then to his parents. "Do you know what it means to mourn the living? To weep for a woman who was still breathing? To curse the gods for a death they never caused?" He placed his hand gently on Ikena's shoulder. "This child grew without a father because you were afraid of a poor girl's shadow touching the throne. This woman walked away with my seed in her womb because you chose pride over truth." His voice trembled, but he did not stop. "I loved her when she had nothing but her name. I loved her when I thought she was only bones in the grave. I loved her when I took a priest to wed her spirit and I 6 months after she was buried. I love her now when she carries my pain and my son. If this is shame, then I will wear it before the world. If this is a crime, then let the ancestors judge me and not your fear." He faced the king and queen fully. "You taught me that a crown is heavy, but you did not teach me that it must be heartless. I will not rule with a lie on my tongue and a dead woman's story in my hands." He drew Adane closer. "This is my wife. This is my son. I did not return to beg. I returned to claim my truth." His eyes hardened with quiet fire. "Accept her or watch me live with her. I will walk away from the golds. I will walk away from titles. I will walk away from this palace, from this den of lies, deception and wickedness, if I must. But I will not walk away from the woman you tried to erase." The courtyard was silent. The earth itself seemed to pause. King Ezudo closed his eyes. He had ruled with strength, he had ruled with fear, but never had he faced something stronger than power, love sharpened by loss.
Guards, go at once
go
and fetch
get
the
for me
native
the
doctor.
chief priest.
This is a matter of
I
utmost
have no
importance.
problem with you getting married to the young woman that has given you an heir, my son. I only have problem with the woman who plotted all this evil under my roof. The king said finally. Queen Nkiru knelt before her husband and sobbed in remorse.
My king, I beg your
and the king
forgiveness.
ignored her.
Please forgive
The
me.
chief priest soon arrived. The rites were held at dawn. The river was called. The elders chanted. The soil was touched. Adane stood barefoot upon the earth of Umuchi, her child at her side, her heart pounding but unbroken. When no cause fell, when no storm rose, when the land remained silent and still, the truth settled. Love had not angered the ancestors. Lies had. For as soon as the chief priest's staff came down on the ground, he said to the queen, when the tortoise plants evil in secret, the sky still hears its footstep. From the mouth of the gods to your ears, Queen of Umuchi, your deeds have been weighed, and your hands are found heavy with guilt. You drove away an innocent girl and the child she carried, the seed of this kingdom. You planted sorrow where there should have been shelter, and you called cruelty wisdom. Because your hands did not spill the blood, the gods will not spill yours. But because your heart wished them erased, your eyes shall be denied the light. From this day, blindness shall walk beside you. You who refuse to see a poor girl become family shall no longer see your son's joy. You who rejected her womb shall never witness the children she bears. You will hear their laughter, but never behold their faces. You will feel small feet run past you, but never see where they go. Thus you will live longing for sight, as you once made another live longing for mercy. You shall sit as queen in darkness, and when your days end, your story shall be told as warning and wisdom. For the one who closes her eyes to justice, the gods will close her eyes to the world. The gods have spoken. A cry tore from the queen's chest. She fell from her throne and crawled forward, her coral beads scattering across the palace floor like broken prayers. No, 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 please, she sobbed. Great ones of the sky and the earth, hear me. She lifted her trembling hands. I did it for the crown. I did it for my son. I feared shame. I feared poverty. I feared the tongues of the people. Her voice cracked. I did not kill her. I did not kill the child. I only sent her away. Spare me this darkness. Let me see my grandchildren. Let me see the face of the woman I wronged. She turned blindly towards Adane. Forgive me, she cried. I thought I was saving my house, but I was burning it with my own hands. She pressed her forehead to the ground. Do not make me queen of night while I still live. Do not let me die without seeing the joy I denied. The chief priest looked down at her, unmoved, and then said, when the rain beats the leopard's skin, it is not to wash it, but to show its spots. Mercy is for the innocent. Punishment is for the wise who chose evil. The wind rose, the lamps flickered, and the queen's eyes clouded, not with tears, but with the shadows of the gods. She screamed once more, then silence took her sight. The crowd stood shocked and trembling, afraid the anger of the gods shall meet them next. When the king recovered from the revelation and shock, he commanded that the queen be taken to her room and that everyone should go back to their homes. The wedding was quiet, no lavish feast, no boastful drums, only truth. When Obinna placed the crown upon Adane's head, his hands trembled, not from doubt, but from reverence. You were never beneath me, he whispered. It was I who knelt to fear. Years later, children would ask why their king listened so closely to the poor, why their queen walked among widows, why their prince played barefoot with village boys, and elders would say, because once the earth swallowed a name and it learned the cost of silence, because love, even when buried, remembers how to rise. Long after the drums of that quiet wedding faded, Umuchi began to change, not suddenly, not loudly, but in the slow, stubborn way rivers reshape stone. People noticed it first in small things. The king walked more often among farmers. The queen spoke less and listened more. Petitions from the poor were no longer treated as interruptions, but as warnings the land itself had sent. And at the center of it all stood Queen Adanne. She did not rule with spectacle, she ruled with memory. First, she forgave her mother-in-law before her wedding, hoping she would regain her sight and witness her only child's wedding. When years came and go, yet there was no sign the queen mother would be regaining her sight soon, Queen Adanne moved on to her next project while putting her mother-in-law in prayers. She remembered what it meant to be unseen. She remembered how power could lie and call it order. She remembered walking away from home with bleeding feet and no certainty except the will to survive. So when widows came to the palace gates, they were welcomed. When orphan children wandered into courtyards, they were fed. When young girls were accused simply for being noticed, the queen's voice rose, calm, firm, unignorable. Love is not a crime, she would say, and poverty is not a sin. Prince Ikenna grew under the weight of many stories. Some called him the child of scandal, others whispered that he was born of prophecy. But he knew only this, that his mother's strength was his inheritance and his father's remorse was his lesson. Sometimes at dusk, Obinna and Adanne would walk together to the edge of the palace grounds, where the world softened into trees and open sky. They did not speak much then, they did not need to. They had already lived through the worlds. On one of such occasions, standing beneath an Iroko tree older than the kingdom itself, Obinna said quietly, "If I had not lost you, I would never have learned how to fight." Adanne smiled sadly. "If I had not lost you," she replied, "I would never have learned how to live." They stood there as the sun sank, two people reshaped by sorrow, stitched together by truth. And far away in the cemetery where a grave once listened, grass grew thick and green over an empty lie. No one visited it anymore. The earth has released the name it was never meant to keep. And so the story passed into memory, not as a tale of tragedy alone, but as a warning carried gently from mouth to mouth, from firelight to firelight, that love buried does not die, that lies rot eventually, that even kingdoms must answer when the earth remembers, and that sometimes the most powerful crown a woman can wear is the one she survives long enough to choose.
This is so peaceful.
It really is.